Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for the 23rd day in the ninth month by the heavenly calendar in the 16th year of Cheon. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Cheon, Hyung, and it is Wednesday. It is Wednesday, so today we take a step back from the news and we go into True Father's teachings because that is the lens, shall we say, or the prism through which we look at the world events. And we know that we studied last week that in order for there to be a world of peace and unity, people, number one, have to know God with certainty. And that's what this is about. OSDP is about knowing God. And of course, we also need to know the spirit world with certainty, and we need to know true parents or Christ with certainty. And those are the first three things. And I think if we can have those first three, the next three should come pretty easily. Knowing that we are all sinners, knowing the providence of restoration through indemnity, and knowing the human portion of responsibility. So OSTP is about all of those six things, I guess you can say, when you take it in total. And it is up to us to help people understand that. Faith is a gift, the Bible says. Not everyone, I guess you can say, not everyone will have faith, but we can certainly help those along who don't have that, who have not been given that gift, but can still know God, though, even though, well, it's not about faith, though. It's about knowing God in your own experience, in your own life. Okay. All right, let's go and start where we left off last time. We left off at slide number 49 last time. Top half is where we did, and telling and explaining how God is the harmonious unified body of original positivity and original negativity, or yang nature and yin nature, and is the father because from the viewpoint of status, he is the masculine subject. And in this way, the exposition of divine principle defines God as our heavenly father. So this is the point where, this is probably the first point where I saw Hakchahan deviating from father. I think I mentioned last time that I was there when in the Hundok room in the palace in Cheonpyeong in Korea. Hundok room, I guess, held what, about, I don't know, 100 or so people, I suppose, maybe a little bit less. 10, 20, maybe a little bit more, yeah, maybe about 100 or a little bit more than 100. And she announced, and this was during the 13-day mourning period. So this was before Father's cosmic ceremony, which occurred on the 15th, right? Yeah, that was on September 15th. And she announced during that mourning period, actually, even before Father's physical body was properly respected and buried, that the name of God was going to change. We're no longer going to refer to God as Father, but rather we were going to refer to him as Heavenly Parent, right? And that was the first time that I could see that she was going off course. Of course, there were, other people can. She constituted the committee to edit and change the Cheon even while Father was still in his physical body, even when he was fighting for his life in the hospital already. She had commissioned Kim Yong-hee and Lee Jae-seok and others to go through the Cheon and change it, and eventually to come up with a new Cheon. You can call it the red Cheon if you like. Anyway, that is the fake Cheon that she finally came up with. So, but the first place where I saw was this place where she was saying, okay, well, let me share this. I guess I'm not sharing it yet. Okay. Where she said, okay, and this sentence is where she first could not unite with Father. In this way, the exposition of the divine principle defines God as our Heavenly Father. He is our Heavenly Father. And so, now, did Father ever use the term Heavenly Parent? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. but not as the name of God, rather as a descriptive of God, I would say. And clearly in the OSDP, Father is God is referred to as our Father. And Jesus did not teach us to pray, "Our parent who art in heaven." He did not say that, right? And um, many people who have fallen into the Han heresy want to say that, well, when Father was in his physical body, we were only seeing the masculine side of God, all right? And now it is time for the feminine side of God to come forth. But let's see here. What does it say here? Explains that God is a harmonious, unified body. He is a unified body, okay? There is no masculine side and feminine side. He is a unified body of original positivity and original negativity. All right. All right, then. Let's not get too bogged down in that one. Unification thought also discusses the attributes of God in its first section, the theory of original image. And this is because, Bible says that we were made in the image of God. And so unification thought goes into, well, what is that image? What is the image of God, the original image? This is because unification thought is God's philosophical thought. Centering on the unification principle, unification thought reorganizes and sets right existing philosophical systems in accordance with the teachings of the true parent. Although unification thought explains God as the original image, it does not reveal his nature as the original substance. And uh, so, so we're getting into ponche is what the Korean here is, right? So this whole lecture series is called the ponche ron, the theory of original substance. We say theory in English, but it's not, theory is something that may not have been proven, but that's not the meaning here. This is the teaching of original substance, I would say, rather than theory of original substance. Okay. Okay. And then OSDP describes God as having two kinds of attributes. The first is divine image, primary attributes or direct attributes, and the second is divine nature, which are secondary attributes or indirect attributes. So I'm just going to read this for a while and get this down there. Okay. And I think you're seeing a black strip here. So let me get that black strip out of the way. It's loading. Control Alt Shift H. Control Alt Shift H. It doesn't work. Okay. Control Alt Shift. I think Shift H. There we go. Okay. Okay. All right. So OSDP describes God as having two kinds of attributes. In addition to divine nature, God's attributes include the divine image, which is a more critical and important attribute. Of God's attributes, divine image refers to the shape or form part of his attributes. Okay, so now we're getting into trouble. we're talking about God having shape or form, and this is where we come against the limitations of language, right? What does it mean that God has shape or form? And this is something that I cannot explain in words. And I think this is something that we're going to have to um, sort of pray about and experience ourselves individually, that God has shape, God has form. And this will be the first of many things that we'll have to have that experience there. Although we cannot see God with our eyes, God has both a shape aspect and also an aspect of elements, material and substance, which are able to express that shape. So Romans 1:20, instead of just skipping over this, let's go to that. And I don't like to just skip over it. Okay. Okay, so we're looking at Romans 1:20, right? See how fast I can come up with these verses. Romans 1:20. says, okay, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And I'm looking at the King James, I'm looking at King James Version right now. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And then also Genesis 1:27. And Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Okay? That's Genesis 1:27. In addition to this shape aspect, God also has aspects of function, character, and ability. We refer to these aspects as God's divine nature. Now, these are going to become very, very important as we go on, these two kinds of attributes, because we're going to be talking about God's internal Songsang, external Songsang, and God's internal Hyongsang and external Hyongsang. And so these two bullet points here, let's look at them maybe a little more carefully and see if we can't sort of imagine in our minds or somehow grasp in our minds how God can have shape or form, because that's going to be God's Hyongsang. That's going to be God's Hyongsang. And then the function, shall we say, his divine nature, I think is going to be more related to his Songsang, that is to say, internal character. Exposition of the divine principle is the highest form of theological text in the history of religion. Unification thought, which reorganizes and sets to right existing philosophies and ideologies centering on the unification principle revealed by True Father, is the highest form of philosophical text. Worldly Poncheron brings together and organizes the contents of these texts. For this reason, the True Parent declared that with the proclamation and teaching of OSDP, the mission of religion has concluded and the history of ideological conflicts is now finished. Well, Father declares this, but people still need to be able to study OSDP and resolve their individual philosophies and beliefs in terms of OSTP, and that's why it's so important that we be teaching this to as many people as possible. Go to the next one here. Okay. As God's providence has progressed, the unification principle has been explained through worldly Hesor, worldly Kangnon, and worldly Poncheron. And I want to emphasize again that we're listing Hesor, which came out in, the late 1950s, Worldly Kangno, which came out in the 1960s, and then Worldly Poncheron, which came out to the year 2000. So we're not including the original text of the principle that Father, the text that Father wrote his own hand. And a person who has seen that original text, and I have not seen it, but a person who has seen that original text said that it cannot be comprehended by the human mind. That's what he said. He said that he saw it and he read it or attempted to read it, and he said it's full of Chinese characters that can be interpreted or understood in various ways. And that is why the Worldly Heso, which came out in the 1950s, was necessary, because Father's teachings, as the original revelation that he wrote down, is according to this person who has seen it. And I only know one person who has actually seen that document, but he said there's no human mind can possibly comprehend that first document that Father wrote. Which is why when someone says, okay, here's a copy of, Tim, here's a copy of that original document, help me translate it, I have to be very skeptical, because what we do know is that Father allowed certain people to copy it by hand. But in copying it, how accurate were they? In fact, one group of people said, okay, we're going to create an authorized text of that. Even though we have not seen the original document, we're going to create an authorized text. And they went about, looking for these copies, the handwritten copies that people had made, and they found three, and they found that they were different from each other. That the three copies that they found, in other words, from three early members who had copied that original text, did not have the same uh, content. They were copied by hand. So how can you have an authorized text, right? But you're just guessing because that was that approved by Father, that authorized text? No, it was not. Who authorized it? Well, a bunch of people who had never seen the original text authorized it. So we need to be careful of people who want to represent that they have something that Father wrote himself. And I'm told that that original text is preserved. We say with trepidation and great deal of hope, preserved at the somewhere in the palace in Cheongpyeong in Korea. Uh, okay, I hope so. I hope so. That would be a tremendous crime if anyone were to have disposed of that. Okay. And I don't know how anyone could be so bold as to do that. You would have to really, well, I don't have to say it. I'm sure you understand. Someone would have to be completely possessed by the devil to have disposed of that document. So anyway, Worli Heso explanation of the principle is a commentary that explains the Worli Wonbon. The Worli Wonbon is the one that I'm talking about. The one is God Father's original document, discovered and revealed by Reverend Sung Moon in both the physical and spiritual realms after he fought and defeated myriads of satanic beings. Worli Heso is the formation stage or symbolic principle. So this is what they first came up with. So Reverend Yu was lecturing the principal, and Father was listening to his lectures, and he approved of the content of the lectures. And over time, Reverend Yu was able to, under Father's supervision, and as a result of asking many questions of Father, was able to come up with a series of lectures that Father said, "Okay, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's you got it." Okay. Father himself did not give these lectures, even in the early church. I'm not aware that he ever gave lectures in the early church. Instead, Reverend Yu was giving the lectures, and Father was listening. He was watching as he gave lectures to members and guests, as Reverend Yu gave lectures to members and guests. The Worli Kangnon, or what we have translated now as in the English title, Exposition of the Principle, is an exposition that arranges the contents of Worli Heso to make them easier and more suitable for lecturing. This is the growth stage or image principle. And the way the Worli Kangnon came about was that Father said, in the 1960s, Father said, okay, now it's time for for people to go out across the country and start witnessing in the towns and villages and in every place around the country. But many people were not really prepared to give lectures. And I spoke with one person who was in charge of was an itinerary worker, basically going around to see how people were doing and help them if they needed help. And this person told me that in some cases, children were sent out by themselves, not with their parents, but by themselves. Even someone who was in the sixth grade was sent out. And this 1960s was a time when there was a great deal of tension with North Korea, and sometimes people who would go out across the country were accused of being North Korean spies because these strange people coming in here and coming into a village and starting these lectures. Police wondered, well, what's going on here? Who is this? And they were suspected. And this itinerary worker said that a number of times she had to get people out of police custody because they had been misunderstood as being somehow involved with North Korea. So, but even children were sent out to lecture in this way. That, you may say, well, that's pretty, well, that's not good. But this is how desperate it was at that time to get the word out as quickly as possible to as many people as possible. And I'm sure Father did not do this out of desire, or he did not do this out of any kind of a sadistic situation, but rather that's how desperate God's providence was in those times. And there were not enough people to do what needed to be done. And so even very young people like that had to take on the responsibility. But they did that, and many of them were later blessed in the 430 couple blessing in 1968. And so you can understand that the people in that blessing have that foundation of tremendous difficulty and suffering that they went through during the 1960s when they were pioneering across Korea. The worldly poncheron, the original substance of divine principle, is the principle that clearly reveals God as the original substance. And that is the purpose of OSDP lectures, to reveal God in this way as ponche, as the ponche. And as I mentioned, ponche can be translated as a main body, right? If you have as I've explained, if you have a computer, then you have a number of accessories, right? You have a mouse, you have a printer, you have you have a camera. What else do you have? Anyway, you have all those things, and those are accessories. But then you have the main body of the computer, and that body in Korean it will be called the ponche, the main body. So maybe that's why the word is being used here, that God is the ponche, he's the main body. Although we've decided to use collectively this phrase original substance, but maybe main body might be easier for you to understand. I don't know, because that is where everything comes from, right? Later on, we'll be talking about how God is the ponche of love. He's the ponche of law. He's the ponche of order. He's the point, so main body. This is where everything comes from. So worldly poncheron is the completion stage or substantial principle. It penetrates deeply to reveal the world of God's shimjon. Shimjon, of course, being that irrepressible impulse of the heart to invest love in a object partner so as to experience love and joy. It penetrates deeply to reveal the world of God's shimjon and the nature of the cosmos. Cosmos meaning here the totality of God's creation, including the spirit world and physical world. It is the principle that will allow us to solve the problems of the world and realize Cheon, which is God's ideal of creation. And as we saw previously, that is the purpose of the main purpose of studying OSDP is to bring solutions to the problems of the world. And this is the only way that we're going to do this eventually. People are doing various things. I know President Trump is doing a great job in the Middle East and with regard to China and with regard to the domestic situation, everything like that. But bottom line, those are basically buying time for us to get the OSDP out so that the people can know God with certainty, so that they can know true parents, know Christ with certainty, so that they can know that they are sinners, know the spirit with certainty, know that they are sinners with certainty, and so forth and so on. Because it's only then that we'll be able to have fundamental solutions to the problems of the world. And I know President Trump says, "Oh, now we have an eternal peace in the Middle East," but okay, maybe not. Okay, not until people in Israel, Gaza, and everybody else in the Middle East understand OSDP and accept True Father as the either the what shall I say, Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, or as the return of Muhammad, or whatever people believe that whoever is coming. Until they accept that, there's not going to be final and eternal peace and everlasting peace in the Middle East or any place else for that matter. So 원리 본체론 is the standard that holds the key to fundamental solutions. And this is what we're looking for, isn't it? Fundamental solutions, not buying time, but actual fundamental solutions to all the complex and intractable problems in the real world, problems that arose because of the fall of Adam and Eve, the ancestors of humankind. So the reason that we can say that OSDP is going to solve all the problems of the world is because all the problems of the world come from a common source, and OSDP deals with that common source. It tells us how to correct that common source, how to make that right. So if we can correct that fall of Adam and Eve and everything that came from it, then we will have the fundamental solutions to all the complex and intractable problems of the world. These problems include all the problems of the world, such as individual problems, family problems, social problems, national problems, ideological problems, religious problems, sex-related problems, problems of immorality, political and economic problems, education and art-related problems. Yeah, art's got a lot of problems, doesn't it? Environmental and pollution problems, problems of international borders, problems related to spiritual phenomena. The solutions to these problems only become available when the attributes of God, namely the divine image and divine nature, are precisely and accurately identified. So that's why we're doing this. No Nobel Prize winner can bring everlasting peace to the world, and no one is going to do it unless we can bring this OSDP message to the world. All right. So now let's talk about how does God exist? Exodus 3:14. Okay, Exodus 3:14. Oh, Exodus. Oh, yeah, okay, okay. That's fine. Okay. Exodus 3:14 says, and God said unto Moses, I am that I am. Okay, this is when Moses, of course, is on Mount Sinai. And he's meeting God for the first time there, and he's about to receive the first copy of the tablets of stone with the Ten Commandments. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, I am, hath sent me unto you. I am. So that is the name of God that is given here in the English version of that verse. I am hath sent me unto you. So in other words, he is self-existent. I am that I am. And he's a spirit, John 4:24. Let's see here. If I can go to John 4:24. Mark, and John 4:24. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Right? And also that God is love. So 1 John 4:8 it says there. So let's look at 1 John 4:8. First John 4:8. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. And also there in Romans 1:20, okay, we already had Romans 1:20 previously, God's power and deity are perceived in the things that have been made. And in Genesis 1:27, we already went there. He created man in his own image, male and female, created he them. Okay. So the laws of existence, there's the law of cause and effect, and the law of resemblance. And Father, of course, does this. This is a very common example that Father gives many times, that when you have the artist and the works of the artist is the cause and the works are the effect. And then you can tell a lot about the artist by looking at his works. If we want to know the about Rembrandt, for example, we can look at his works, we can look at the paintings that he created, and those paintings tell us a lot about Rembrandt, the person, because he's the cause here. And so we can say that, well, Romans 1:20 says that his power and deity are perceived in the things that have been made. So looking at the things that God made, in other words, the creation, uh, this tells us something about God. So we can tell something about God from this, just as we can uh, tell something about Rembrandt from the paintings that he painted. Okay? And then, so these are the law. This is the law of existence and the law of resemblance. So also because the created things resemble God, and the paintings that Rembrandt created resemble Rembrandt in some way. All right, and then there are God's dual characteristics. So he exists in dual characteristics. So let's take a look at this chart now. Okay, and we can play with this for a while, can't we? Okay. So let's look at this. Okay, so then we have God as the first cause, okay, and He is the original substance, and He is the harmonious unified body of dual characteristics of Seong-sang and Hyung-sang, and also the harmonious unified body of dual characteristics of Yang and Yin. God is the first cause; He's the creator, the absolute being, and the unique one. Now, I know some of you are going to say, "Well, what you're going to know where we're going with this," and you're going to say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." So, uh, and let me see here. I had an email from someone. Let me deal with that here. Let me read you an email that someone sent, not to me directly, but to someone else, and then it was forwarded to me. Okay, let's think about this together. Okay, here we go. All right. This was sent to me about a week ago. Um, mm, bu- 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 Okay. So this person is saying that we need to update some of the content of the Divine Principle book, or the exposition of Divine Principle. And for example, it says that on page 16 of the exposition of Divine Principle, it states that plants can propagate by means of stamen and pistil. This is a true statement, but it is very misleading, this person says. It is similar to saying flowers are yellow. This is also a true statement, but it promotes the generalization that all flowers are yellow, which is a misleading partial truth. The diversity of plant life is very large. Botanists today describe 10 to 14 different plant phyla. These include liverworts, hornworts, mosses, algae, lycophytes, ferns, ginkgos, cicads, anyway, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can't pronounce even all of these. Conifers and flowering plants. There is only one phylum, and that has stamen and pistils. The flowering plants, stamens and pistils are used only for sexual reproduction. Some flowering plants that have stamens and pistils can also reproduce asexually. One example is the common dandelion. Dandelions can produce haploid offspring without fertilization, and they can produce diploid offspring with fertilization using their stamen and pistil. My suggestion for revising the statement in exposition of the DP would be plants can reproduce either sexually or asexually. When flowering plants reproduce sexually, they will use a male stamen and a female pistil. Well, this person is talking about revising the Divine Principle book. So you can imagine um, you can imagine what kind of reaction that is going to get, because he's talking about the English translation, but the a translation uh, if it's going to call itself a translation, it has to be faithful to the original. If you want to change something only in the translation without first changing the original, then it's no longer a translation. Right? It's a different book. So this person is making suggestions for the English uh, book, but obviously that's not going to work unless you first argue that, okay, this is how I would change the original uh, Worldly Kangnon book. And then once the Worldly Kangnon book in the Korean is changed, then we can talk about how to translate that into English. So, but unfortunately, and this is where I think it is an example of why it is unfortunate that not more people in the West have learned Korean. Uh, you cannot go the other way. You cannot change the English and then expect the Korean to change to match that. So, but I think the person's point that uh, science has moved beyond what the Worldly Kangnon wrote or expressed in the 1960s is certainly a point to be considered. And I think perhaps in our lectures, at least, we need to point out that this is the case. That as a generalization, we're going to say that, but that they produce this in this way. But now here he says that plants propagate by means of stamen and pistil. And I don't know if that's what it says in the. Okay. And I don't know if maybe this is a problem of the here I have a copy of the Word Economy. Maybe this is a problem of the translation, and maybe we can get away with making a translation that's more faithful to the original. That would be convenient, wouldn't it? I don't know. See, I'm in the general introduction now. So we would have to be somewhere around here. Okay, I'm gonna find it right away. Yeah. All right, I cannot find it right now. Okay. All right, I have to find the English expedition. So let's see right now. Bookshelf. Okay. So anyway, let's keep that in mind. That in some cases, science has revealed more of a God's truth, and that's what science is doing, right? It's supposed to, and that's their job, to reveal more about God. So here, but it still uh, is true that God created human beings as male and female, and the song sung he has given us all mind and body, and also the yang nature and yin nature, male and female. And as the animals, there's male and female in the mind. There's still a stamen and pistil. It's just that the reproduction is a little more complicated than it was originally believed in the 1960s. I think that's the only thing. I don't think it undermines the content of our Father's teaching. And then molecules, there's interdirector, the positive and negative ions, and atoms, nucleus, and the nucleus and the electron, and nucleus, including the protons and the neutrons. And then the particles, the subatomic particles, yang type nature or yin type nature, in other words, the positive ions and uh, uh, positive ions and negative ions and so forth. Yeah. So God's Songsang and Hyungsang and his yang nature and yin nature are reflected in the creation, and we can, when we look at the creation, when we see the creation, we can uh, understand something about God in that. You know, I gave a sermon at the Korean church here last week, and I was talking about how, you know, in the uh, uh, true love hormone lecture that the king is giving right now in in many of his talks. really we can see God in that lecture, in the way that God has prepared hormones in an external way to make it possible for human beings to love each other through uh, and the. If you haven't seen that lecture, I hope you do so quickly. In fact, I will put a link to that lecture, the English version of his lecture, in the uh, description below of this YouTube video. Okay. So here, so here, from the viewpoint of status, he is the masculine subject in relationship to his creation. He is the father, uh, and this is not to say that God is masculine. Well, he's actually masculine and feminine, but in his relationship to the creation, he is in the uh, masculine status. And Father talks about position, and sometimes he talks about status, and these two are different. And I think we need to understand the difference. He never says that God's position is the Father position, but rather he says that that is the status. In other words, in relation to his creation, he is in that masculine position. And that's why we refer to him as Father. And that is why it is heretical for people to pray to him as Heavenly Parent. You cannot do that and be consistent with God's uh, teaching, with God's ideal of creation. He is not our Heavenly Parent when we address him. He is our Father when we address him. We address him as Father. Jesus addressed him as Father. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And he addressed him as Father. Yeah. Um, so let's look at here that and God's original original substance. The original substance always stands for original substance. There's the Song Sang and the Hyung Sang, and here in his Song Sang and Hyung Sang, we have a universal prime force in the Hyung Sang, principle, law, and order, infinite energy and ability. And in his Song Sang, we have true love, character, infinite spirit, and divinity in his Song Sang. So here we're taking this out here, and we're taking this out and explaining it to more in detail with this graph here. And you know this graph, I'm sure. Okay. So in the relationship, the subject is the internal cause and the vertical and incorporeal, whereas the object is the external result, the horizontal and corporeal. So in the relationship of God's original Song Sang and original Hyung Sang, they are completely equal elements. They're a unified body, and they're unified. So Father explains it in terms of, for example, water. We know that water can be liquid, it can be vapor, or it can be ice, but they are all H2O. Let's put but they are all H2O. So we can we can see God as in different ways, but they are all God. They're not separate. They're not different. They're homogeneous with each other. And so the dual characteristics, this is, I think the word theory is going to cause some misunderstanding. Teaching of unique oneness. Okay. Barely hitting the bottom there. Okay. So we'll be going into this, and I think a lot of chapter 1 is going to be relating back to this particular chart. So we'll be coming back to it again and again. So the attributes of God's attributes are divine image and divine nature. We talked about that. And divine image is God's primary attribute. The direct attribute in divine nature is God's secondary attribute or indirect. So we're gonna be explaining that in just a minute here. So in divine image, there's the universal image and the individual image. Dual characteristics of original Seongsang, original Hyongsang, direct attributes, and they are the primary attributes, and then dual characteristics of original Yang, original Yin nature. These are the indirect attributes and the secondary attributes. And then we have the individualization of the universal image, this the individual truth body. So each of us is an individual truth body, and every creation of God is an individual truth body. And they are the individualization of God's universal image. So God is not in God himself is not in the trees or the rocks, which is the way that animists believe, for example. But a tree or a rock or a human being is an individualization of the universal image. And in the dual characteristics of original Seongsang and original Hyongsang, the original Seongsang, internal character, and original Hyongsang, external form, these are the primary attributes. And then the original Seongsang corresponds to God's mind, Simjong, true love, and personality. And it is the root cause of all incorporeal functional elements in the creation. Whereas his Hyongsang, original Hyongsang, corresponds to God's body, the principle, law, order, and root cause of all corporeal physical elements in the creation, raw material and substance for the creation of the universe. And he possesses unlimited potential ability to be molded to express the forms of all created beings. So when this is answering the question, when God created, so where did he get the stuff with which to create? You know, if I'm going to create a chair even or a desk, I have to go out to Home Depot and buy some wood. Or if it's going to be steel, I have to go to some place where I can buy that steel and get the steel so that I can bring it home and I can mold it, or I can change it into the thing that I want to have, whether it's a desk or a chair. So where did God get the stuff that he used to create? Well, and the answer is that this is within his original Hyongsang, that the stuff that he used to create, the material, the raw material that he used to create is actually within his original Hyongsang. And then he's still creating today, by the way. Creation is not something that stopped at one point. He's still creating today. But also he does this according to principle, law, and order. And Father talks about how Father or God has absolute obedience. And he's absolutely obedient to his original design and his original ideal of creation, because he is a God of principle, law, and order. They cannot destroy the creation that he first began simply because it went wrong. So he has to. That is why he's been working all this time, these millennia, to accomplish that original ideal of creation instead of simply destroying it and beginning again. The original Seongsang corresponds to the mind, his Simjong, true love, and personality, and it is the root cause of all incorporeal functional elements in the creation. I think that's easier for us to understand. We tend to think of God more in terms of his being, his Simjong and his true love and his personality and his being a spirit, and it's the original Hyongsang, I think, that gives us more difficulty. But that is where we have God's shape or form, and that is where we have difficulty understanding. So this chart then starts to help us to understand how that begins to work. So we have the internal structure of original Seongsang and original Hyongsang. And remember, we are not dissecting God here in order just for the sake of dissecting. We're dissecting, or we are looking into God so that by knowing God more deeply, we can have a deeper relationship with him and understanding him more deeply. So we'll save the God of night and God of day for just a little bit later. But God, of course, is original Seongsang and original Hyungsang. Okay, we've established that. But then within original Seongsang, there is the inner Seongsang and the inner Hyungsang. The inner Hyungsang is within the original Seongsang. This is the inner Seongsang, which is the core of Shimjong, true love, and personality. And in the inner Hyungsang, we have ideas, concrete representations, and concepts and principles in mathematics. This is within. So when we say God is a God of mathematics, He's a God of numbers. It's within that comes from the inner Hyungsang, which is a part of His original Seongsang. And the original Hyungsang then is we have the outer Seongsang here. These are inner, these are outer Seongsang, which is principle, law, and order, and the outer Hyungsang, which is the universal prime force. And it is within the outer Hyungsang where we have the substance and matter, things that can be constructed or to be made into the things of His creation, whether it's plants or trees, human beings, the planets and the stars and everything else. So these are the form aspects, there's the shape and the malleability that God has within the universal prime force, which is within His outer Hyungsang. So here, let's go through this a little more in order here. So within inner Seongsang, let's take this from the top. This is intellect, emotion, and will. And we'll be talking more about the intellect, emotion, and will. And those are part of God's inner Seongsang. And within intellects, we have awareness, the intellectual function, the sensitivity, understanding, and reason, which we use all the time in our daily life, and also emotion. Emotion, God has emotion. This is where Father's teaching goes beyond the traditional teaching of Christianity. That God has emotion. He can be angry, He can be sad, and He can suffer. The idea of God suffering is difficult for traditional Christianity to understand because they think that He's all powerful, He's almighty. How can you suffer if you are almighty? But He does. And that is why He is our personal God. And we have emotion because God has emotion. If God did not have emotion, then He would not be able to create emotion within us because we are in His image, right? That's what it means, that we are in His image. To be in His image means that everything that we have comes from God. Everything that we have is in God and it comes from God. So joy, anger, sorrow, and pleasure, examples of that emotion, and also within that inner Seongsang is God's will, His desire, His drive, decision, determination, and execution. So when we talk about God's will, that's something a little bit different. That's a different word in Korean. When we talk about let's accomplish God's will, the word in Korean is 뜻, 뜻. Whereas here, the word for will here in Korean is Chijongwi. So it's Chi is intellect and emotion is Chong and Wi is will. So it's a different word. So let's not confuse it with the will of God that needs to be accomplished. So it's the desire, the drive, the decision, determination, execution. So that is the inner Seongsang. And I think that's pretty straightforward. So inner Hyungsang, ideas that concrete representations and concepts and principles in mathematics, that's the inner Hyungsang. And all of that makes up the original Seongsang. And that is the Godhead or the God of night. That is the Godhead. Okay. And then original Hyungsang, there's the outer Seongsang and the outer Hyungsang. And the outer Seongsang is the principle, law, and order. Principle, law, and order. And that's related, you might say, to principles in mathematics. Well, that's because God is not, we cannot really dissect God in that way. Well, this belongs to here and that belongs to there because it's all a unified body, and we cannot separate anything from everything else. But we are pulling Him apart in this way, so as we can, just for our own understanding, principle, law, and order. And then also there's the outer Hyungsang is the universal prime force, where there's pure energy, love energy, and Shimjong type impulse or urge. Right? and also the essential matter, the material substance, and unlimited malleability. In other words, there's no limit to the amount of creation, the number of things that God can create in the universe. And I think right now, astrophysics is just beginning to approach that understanding. I think they have a little bit more to understand, but basically understanding right now. But they still think that, or some physicists still believe that at some point in the future, maybe billions of years from now, the universe will stop expanding and then it will grow cold and it will collapse in on itself, or something like that. And but that comes from the Big Bang Theory, which I think people are beginning to question more and more. By the way, Father disagrees with the Big Bang Theory. In other words, the Big Bang Theory disagrees with God, or with Father. So the Big Bang Theory is I don't know if it's wrong, but at least it's incomplete, because Father's teaching is that God continues to inject energy into the universe. So there is not a finite amount of energy in the universe, or E equals mc squared would imply that E is or that there's a finite combination of energy and matter that can go back and forth, but there's a finite amount. But Father knows that there's continual injection of more and more energy into the universe, and so it's going to expand forever. I believe that's how I understand Father's teaching about that. Okay, and then so let's go. I think we'll be referring back to this chart as we go along. The dual characteristics of original Sungsang and original Hyungsang. So God's, or the divine image, is the harmonious subject partner and harmonious unified body of the dual characteristics of original internal nature and original external form. So here, the original, okay, when we're talking about divine image, is the harmonious subject partner, okay, and harmonious unified body of the dual characteristics of original internal nature and original external form. So this is the original internal nature. Internal nature is the Sungsang, and the original external form or Hyungsang. So God is the unified body. He's not. He does not have one aspect, and we can look at him from another aspect, but he's the unified body of these two. And God, he's the original Sungsang, or mind type energy. So original Sungsang, mind type energy, and original Hyungsang, the energy type mind. And that it took me a long time to get my head around this. And it's mind type energy. So one is energy. It's energy, but it's mind type energy. The other is Hyungsang, is mind, but it is the energy type mind. And the original substance of energy is the harmonious subject. Let me see if I can get that here. Okay. Okay. And then I think this is supposed to be, where's this one? Oops. So the original substance of, he's the original substance of energy, or the main body, shall we say again, the main body of a computer, where he's the original substance of energy. So all energy comes from God. And he is the harmonized subject, or the cause, and he is the unique substance. And he's also then the harmonious unified body of dual characteristics, is the result of the unified attribute. So this is the original Hyungsang, and then is the result of the unified attribute. So then the teaching of, let's not say theory, I think, and teaching of unique oneness and the being of unique oneness. Then the unified body, original Sungsang, original Hyungsang. Let's try to finish this slide. The divine image is the unified body of original internal nature and original external form. Why? Because original internal nature and original external form are homogeneous in nature. If these were heterogeneous, they could not form a unified body. For example, the phenomena of water, ice, and steam appear as liquid, solid, and gas, but in essence, they are the homogeneous H2O. In contrast, water and oil are both liquids, but they do not become one. Why? Because water and oil are heterogeneous. So this gets back to what we were talking about before in this chart here at the bottom here, that water. So we're talking about here, everything here is all homogeneous. And just as water can be liquid, vapor, or ice, but they're all H2O. And so you can have liquid, water, and steam and ice all in one environment, and they don't reject each other because they're all H2O. So homogeneous original substance, original Sungsang, original Hyungsang is monism. And monism here meaning, and I know monism has a different meaning in Western philosophy, but here it's being mean to say unique being of oneness or hanani. So it's not dualism, it's monism or oneism. And then the heterogeneous would be dualism. This will have conflict, confrontation, and struggle. And I would say that the Han heresy seems to believe more in the heterogeneous original Sungsang, original Hyungsang, or the heterogeneous Yang and Yin nature. That's why they believe there is conflict between the two, conflict, confrontation, and struggle. Okay, I got to go. So I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll be continuing these OSDP lectures every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Is that right? Yes, 7 a.m. Eastern time, 7 to 8. And then also that'll be on Rumble and Twitch, and also uploading these to YouTube later on. All right. Godspeed. God bless Godspeed, and may His kingdom come quickly.